Welcome back, everybody. We're now on the final leg of Avalon Rising Sunrise Celebration 2011. We've got a keynote speaker for Saturday, or for the whole event really, Mr. Graham Hancock, who's been actually at the first ever sunrise back in 2006. I don't know if any of you remember that, but that was the year John Michel also came along, so it was quite a legendary event, that one, on an Earth Mysteries front. So it's really pleased to have Graham back. We've been having Graham involved in numerous events that we're up to. He's got some fascinating books, as you know, Fingerprint of the Gods, Heaven's Mirror, and many others. And his more recent work has gone more into the otherworldly realms, as you'll know from his book Supernatural and his recent novel Entangled. So he's going to be opening up some of that tonight for us this weekend. So please give a warm welcome to Graham Hancock.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I can make myself heard above the competition. So the factual background to the talk I'm going to give tonight is very much contained in Supernatural. While I was researching Supernatural, I encountered Ayahuasca, the Vine of Souls, and after some 30-some sessions with Ayahuasca told me to go away and write a novel, and that novel is called Entangled, so it also relates to what we're talking about here tonight. Consciousness is really a huge mystery of science. We know that our brains are definitely involved in consciousness in some way, but it's unclear exactly how. And science has really not solved and does not claim to have solved the problem of consciousness. We have these few pounds of jelly inside our skulls. How do we explain that this transmutes emotions, feelings, love, our reaction to an amazing sunset, to a beautiful symphony? How does this physical object inside our skulls allow us to admit into consciousness these incredible experiences? And one view of the brain and of consciousness is that the brain actually makes consciousness the way that a factory makes cars. And most mainstream reductionist and materialist scientists are happy to stop with that, really. So that's why you'll find that most mainstream scientists are of the view that when we die, it's all over, and there is no such thing as life after death. That seems a nonsensical idea to a materialist scientist, because if the brain makes consciousness, when the brain is dead, obviously there's no more consciousness, and therefore there's no room for spirit or the soul or any such constructs in the scientific point of view. But another possibility needs to be considered, and this is that the relationship of the brain to consciousness is more like the relationship of a TV set to a TV signal. So in the factory analogy, if you smash up the factory, it doesn't make cars anymore. But in the TV analogy, if you smash the TV set, the signal is still there. And in this analogy, suggesting that the brain is a transceiver or a transmuter of consciousness onto the material plane, allows us to consider all kinds of anomalies which are ruled out by the mainstream scientific paradigm. Because if the consciousness is not actually produced by the brain, but is simply mediated through the brain, then there's no reason for us to assume that consciousness dies when the brain dies. So these are two opposite possibilities when we come to dealing with consciousness. Now, and the questions are very far from settled, and they particularly touch on the issue of visions or so-called hallucinations. There's actually no evidence at all which permits scientists to reduce hallucinations and visions to the brain activity that is associated with those experiences. But actually many, indeed most mainstream scientists just automatically by default do that. They will put a hallucinating individual into an MRI scanner, and they will see that bits of the brain light up on the scanner, And they will conclude that the experiences that that person is having are nothing more than the brain activity that is taking place, that is just a pure artifact of the brain, and there's nothing more to it than that. But actually, this is an incredibly stupid idea about the nature of the brain. And the analogy that I like to give to show that we cannot reduce these experiences to physical changes in the brain is the analogy of a telescope. If we want to look at distant stars with our telescope, we're going to have to point it at the right region of the sky, and then we're going to have to focus that telescope. And as we focus it, physical changes will take place inside the barrel of the telescope in the relationship between the lenses. And eventually, a star will come into view. We'll be able to see it. We'd be completely wrong to say that that star is the physical changes inside the barrel of the telescope. Of course it's not. Those physical changes have simply allowed us to see the star. And it may be the same with these interesting experiences called hallucinations or visions, that physical changes are taking place in the brain, temporary changes, which allow us to see more of reality than is normally accessible to our senses. Think of it as an internal lens applied to the brain, if you like. If we're going to consider the mysteries of consciousness, these are the people that we really need to go talk to. Not mainstream Western scientists, but the shamans of tribal and hunter-gatherer societies all around the world. And altered states of consciousness are the essence of shamanism wherever we find it. If somebody claims to be a shaman and they are not entering an altered state of consciousness, then I'm quite certain that they're not a shaman. They might be something else, something very useful, very positive, but if they're not in a deeply altered state of consciousness, they're not doing shamanic work. So it's the manipulation, an ancient spiritual technology for manipulating consciousness that we're dealing with shamanism, and it goes very, very far back in the human story. In their trance states, in their altered states of consciousness, shamans frequently report encounters with intelligent entities who they normally construe as spirits or spirit beings. And these entities are shapeshifters. They can take all manner of different forms. Sometimes they take human form, sometimes they take animal form. Sometimes, very often, they're what are called therianthropes. That's from the Greek therion, which means wild beast, and anthropos, which means man, part animal, part human combinations. And shamans of all cultures also report that they themselves transform into animals and into therianthropic entities when they enter the spirit world in their trance state. Now, here's a curiosity, and that's one of the things that I'm going to go into tonight, is that many of the experiences that shamans report with spirits are incredibly similar to the experiences that modern Westerners report with UFO abductions. The UFO abduction phenomenon has astonishing similarities with shamanistic experience, and I'll go into some of that tonight. And in fact, more and more shamans themselves are depicting encounters with UFOs and aliens. This is the work of Pablo Amaringo, a great ayahuasca shaman who unfortunately died in 2009. And if I can get my laser pointer to work, well, you can see the flying saucer up here. Flying saucers up there at the top right in this picture. And then something else in the picture is this creature here, which is a therianthrope, a man with a human body and with the head of a bird. And we'll find other flying saucer-like creature entities in other works by Pablo Amaringo. And he saw them as vehicles for entering and leaving the spirit world. Here's a classic therianthrope, a human-headed serpent, and off to the right here, what looks like a flying saucer with entities that we would tend to construe as aliens on the top of it. Now, there's a huge body of knowledge available about shamanism. Iliad's amazing study of shamanism on its own will provide you with thousands of examples, but there's a vast literature on which we can draw if we want to understand the experiences that shamans had. And likewise, there's a vast literature that tells us about the experiences that UFO abductees have had. For example, John Mack, who was professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, had hundreds of people in his practice who believed they'd been abducted by UFOs. And unlike most of his colleagues, he didn't ridicule them. He didn't automatically regard them as insane. He took them seriously, and he recorded their testimony, and he came to certain conclusions. And John Mack's work and his interviews with people who believed they'd been abducted by UFOs is a fantastic database for drawing comparisons with the shamanistic experience. So to give just a few examples, as we've seen, shamans frequently encounter spirits in animal or bird form or as therianthropes. And very often UFO abductees, when they encounter the other, when they encounter the alien, that entity may not be a classic, typical grey initially. They very frequently encounter the entity first in animal form. So Virginia Horton remembers talking to an intelligent grey deer. Another abductee sees a wolf standing on her bed. And John Mack summarizes it that the aliens appear to be consummate shapeshifters, often initially appearing to the abductees as animals. Owls, eagles, raccoons, and deer are among the creatures the abductees have seen initially. This sense of being lifted up into the sky is another thing which is shared in common with shamans and UFO abductees. In some shamanic accounts, it's a straightforward lift into the heavens. In others, there's a thread or a rope of light which the shaman reaches out to touch and is drawn up into the sky. And again, from the examples that I'm giving here, exactly the same phenomena is reported by UFO abductees. Andrea reports a line or a thread of light. Arthur sees a light like a thread, a spider's thread that's coming down from the sky, and he's going to go up that in order to get to the UFO. Again, there's astonishing parallels with experiences reported by shamans. What about places that the abductions go to? It's not only to a spaceship or to a flying saucer. Very often abductees report being abducted into caves or underwater. And again, there's an exact parallel with the shamanistic experience here, where the shaman experiences himself abducted into caves and meets entities in the depths of those caves. Exactly the same kind of experiences being reported by UFO abductees. And the shamanic ordeal. This is the classic universal shamanistic experience of being hacked to pieces by the spirits, of being pierced with knives or spears or nails, of being physically disassembled, one's bones counted, cut to piece, objects being inserted into one's body, crystals into the brain or under the skin of the arm. These are universal shamanistic experiences. And how different are they really from the experiences of bizarre surgery that so many UFO abductees report again and again and again as part of their experiences. And they also experience objects being placed into their bodies, into the brain or into the limbs. They have experienced bone counting is found both in the shamanic domain and in the UFO abductee domain. Here's Sandra Larson, abducted by a UFO. Beings remove her brain and set it down beside her. Yakut shaman, the spirits cut off his head, which they set aside. I think you've got to admit that the parallels are really very, very close. And then what about sexual relations? Shamans are always having sex with spirits. I know a shaman in the Amazon whose wife has left him because of his relationships in the spirit world. He's got kids in the spirit world. He's constantly going over there and visiting them. His wife's very unhappy about it. This is a very, very common feature of the shamanistic experience is sexual relations with spirits and hybrid children with spirits. And again, we find the same story coming up with UFO abductees, reporting sexual relationships with aliens and the production of hybrid children with aliens. That's how we're construing these experiences. What about books? This also is found in the UFO abductee domain and in the shamanic domain. Maria Sabina was given a book by a spirit from which she learned many things about the land where everything is known. wasn't allowed to bring that book back with her. It remains in the sky. She was under the influence of psilocybin mushrooms. But here's UFO abductee Betty Hill. She's given a book by a being she identifies as the leader of the aliens. And here's another case of a book with 40 blue luminous pages. It's very, very bizarre that in both domains we find these same themes occurring. And let's go to another domain now, to the domain of fairies and elves, supposedly completely different from aliens or from spirits. And what do we find? We find that, again, they have an astonishing amount in common with those other two supposedly different domains. The initial work in this field was done by Jacques Vallée, really fantastic book called Passport to Magonia, published in 1969. First book really to draw attention to the eerie similarities between fairy lore and UFO lore. And what I did in Supernatural was to take that dossier of information on from 1969 through until today. So fairies were very much in the business of abduction. They were abducting people all the time. And you didn't want to get close to the fairy dance. You didn't want to be drawn into it or to touch it, because if you did, you would find yourself suddenly in another world where everything was very different, and you might be entertained by the residents of that world. You might be given food, you might be given shelter. A few hours might pass, and then they'd let you go home, and then you would discover that 500 years had passed in your hometown. This is very common in fairy lore. Sounds like an extreme example of the missing time phenomenon reported by UFO abductees. Fairies, just like spirits, just like aliens, tortured and hurt human beings, but they could also be kind to them and give them gifts, including healing powers. Like aliens and like spirits, fairies had the power of flight. They used flying vehicles, which are construed as flying boats or flying castles and so on and so forth. And fairy abductions very often involved an abduction underground, as we saw was the case with spirits and with aliens. Interestingly, in both of these old woodcuts, there's a mushroom in the foreground, an Amanita muscaria mushroom here, and probably psilocybes down that one. Something else interesting here is that the human individual in the lower image is being seduced by fairy women. They're urging him to come into the hollow hills to have an amorous encounter with them. And again, that reminds us of this theme of sex with spirits and sex with aliens, which is found again and again and again. Fairies and elves often appear as animals or part animal, part human hybrids. In this woodcut from Holland, 15th century, a group of fairies are shown dancing in a ring, and if you look at the fairies, you can see that they are therianthropes. They are part animal, part human in form. As is Melusine, a feared medieval fairy who was part serpent and part human in form, and she was feared for the abduction of human babies. And that's where, again, we come back to this reproductive theme, the theme of romance between fairies and humans, of hybrid children between fairies and humans, and of women being abducted to wet nurse or nursemaid these fairy babes. So I think that these three supposedly very different domains, the domain of fairies, the domain of aliens, and the domain of spirits, I would suggest they're actually all one domain. They're all the same thing, seen through different cultural spectacles in different periods of history. And in every case, I would suggest involving altered states of consciousness, either individuals who were spontaneously able to enter trance states, or perhaps through geomagnetic effects. Many of the fairy encounters were done around stone circles, which also have an influence of consciousness. But I suggest that consciousness is the key to all of this. Now, how far back can we trace this peculiar phenomena of human experience? If we remind ourselves of some of the forms in which aliens and spirits and fairies all appear, we will find that that form, the form of the therianthrope, part animal, part human, the beast man, is actually the very oldest piece of art surviving from anywhere in the world, shows a therianthrope. It's from Fumani Cave in Italy, human body, head and horns of some kind of gigantic bull, probably an auroch. Or this lion man from Hollenstein Stadel Cave in Germany, carved out of mammoth ivory. 22,000 years old, human body and the head of a lion. Well, this bison man from Chauvet Cave in France, 33,000 years old, head of a bison and the hind legs of a human being. Similar imagery carried on being painted in the caves, the painted caves of southern Europe, for thousands and thousands of years, like this the so-called sorcerer from Trois Frères, 17,000 years old. He's part stag, part horse, part wolf, part owl, and part human being. Where did the artist get that notion from? Clearly this was not a realistic portrayal of something seen in everyday life. So what was going on here? What was the inspiration for these kind of works of art? And if we pull back from this image, we can begin to see what's going on, because Bison Man is in fact straddling a female form. And the female form is depicted as headless. But if you look at her right arm here, you'll see that her right arm is transforming into the head of a lion, like these lions down here. So this is not about somebody dressed up in skins. What we're looking at here is an image of a person caught in the moment of transformation between lion and human form. This is a moment of shape-shifting, which is witnessed here. And these shape-shifting experiences are the everyday fare of shamanism and of altered states of consciousness. This is what we see in deeply altered states of consciousness. This is what shamans encounter all the time. Look at some of the other strange imagery from the caves. Look at these curious creatures with those large, dark eyes and pointed faces. Or here from Angoulême in France, 27,000 years old. Or this extraordinary piece from Pêche Merle, where we see an individual here with a very curious head, large domed forehead, dark eyes, narrow pointed chin, and some sort of object up in the sky above that figure. This is 24,000 years old. I've sat in front of it in Pêche Merle Cave. It's a most eerie image. And if we get closer to it and do a redrawing of it, to my eye, it looks very much like the kind of entity that today we would automatically, in National Enquirer, identify as a grey. And it's not only entities. There are objects painted on the cave walls like this or like this, which archaeologists cannot identify. But they look a lot like Pablo Amaringo's flying saucers to me. It's just that there's 20,000 years between the different images. Of these three images, two were created more than 20,000 years ago in the painted caves, and one was created in 1990 by one of John Mack's patients. John Mack's patient said that every time the aliens came to abduct her, they projected this image into her visual field. I'm suggesting that the same inspiration lies behind the identical ancient imagery. The modern image is the one at the right, top right of the screen, and the other two images are both more than 20,000 years old. And I'm not coming to a kind of nuts and bolts conclusion about this. I don't think that this problem is nearly as simple as just high-tech aliens coming here in ultra-sophisticated spacecraft across interstellar space. I'm sure the universe is full of life, but I don't think that's what this mystery is about. I think the mystery is more elusive and more linked to consciousness than that. If I were to put a bet on it, I would suggest that we're dealing with an interdimensional phenomenon here, rather than necessarily a phenomenon in this dimension just involving very high-tech travel from one side of the universe to the other. And that's why actually the visionary substances, particularly dimethyltryptamine and psilocybin, which has been described as the orally active version of dimethyltryptamine, are of particular interest and importance in these matters. Because it's now becoming widely recognized that the inspiration of the cave artists was hallucinogenic mushrooms. We now have actual an image has been found where the mushrooms Psilocybe hispanica are actually demonstrated. And that has been the final thing that has forced science to accept this. But of course the evidence has been present in the cave art itself for thousands and thousands of years. there's certain very distinctive features of this cave art which tell us that it can only have been produced as a result of altered states of consciousness. Whether it's geometrical patterns underneath these fantastically elaborate antlers here, or again, look at this grid, this geometrical pattern off to the right of the screen here amongst these running horses from Lascaux. Another grid over here. A grid between two ibexes. If we're going to explain this art, we have to be able to explain all of its characteristics. More grids and curious honeycomb-like patterns from Altamira and similar from El Castillo in Spain, these flows of dots running down the cave wall. What's really shed light on this has been work that was done in the 50s and 60s, mainly using hallucinogenic drugs, LSD, DMT, mescaline, psilocybin, etc., to induce altered states of consciousness, and then studying the experiences that the volunteers reported. And as a result of this work, certain universal experiences and so-called hallucinations were reported. Amongst them, for example, entoptic phenomena. So many volunteers reported the experience of patterns like this, often in scintillating colors, but these geometrical patterns, the starbursts, the grids, the wavy lines, and so on, that the scientists were able to draw up a chart of this universal human experience in hallucinatory states, and these are called entoptic phenomena. And interestingly enough, if we look at those entoptic phenomena, we can find them reproduced in rock and cave art all over the world, not just by the Western volunteers on LSD in labs, but by the San and the Coso, for example. In both cases, before those cultures were destroyed, their shamans were approached by Western ethnographers, and they told them what they were doing with the rock art. They said, "We enter vision. We go into the spirit world. We record what we saw there on the rocks when we return." We can't interview the Paleolithic artists, but the appearance of exactly the same entoptic phenomena in their art, as in all the other art, leaves no doubt at all that it is an art of altered states of consciousness. This was a visionary art, as we would expect of shamans. And those Western researchers, they also this chart, stage 1, stage 2, vortex, stage 3, that as we get deeper into the trance, there's a sense of passing through a vortex into a seamlessly convincing parallel world where many of us, not all of us, will encounter intelligent entities who communicate with us. And one of those Western volunteers drew the intelligent entity that he encountered under mescaline, which was dressed in a modern business suit but had the head of a fox. And that's really no different from the lion-headed man or the bison-headed man from the time of the painted caves. I would suggest the inspiration is the same, which is altered states of consciousness. The scholarly work has been done on this by David Lewis Williams of the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. He's really nailed it down. There's no doubt with that cave art, we're dealing with shamanistic art. Those artists were tripping on psilocybe mushrooms 30,000 years ago. And those journeys on psilocybe mushrooms inspired the art that they created, and the fingerprints of that experience is still there in the art. So once we accept that altered states of consciousness were involved, everything about the cave art and its relationships to later experiences begins to make shape and to make sense. And actually, since we can take hallucinogens ourselves, we can even experience what those shamans were experiencing. And I suppose the modern example of this is Rick Strassman's work at the University of New Mexico. The first American scientist for more than 20 years to be allowed to work with a powerful hallucinogen in human volunteers. And he gave his volunteers by intravenous infusion doses of dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And subsequently, he wrote this amazing book about it called The Spirit Molecule. And what's really interesting about DMT is that we all have it in our bodies already. It's a Class A drug in this country. You can go to prison for consuming DMT, but we actually all generate it. Even the policeman who arrests you is going to have DMT in his bloodstream. And we don't know why it's there or why it's in our bodies, but it's there. And like everything else in our bodies, it almost certainly does have a function. It's thought to be produced in the pineal gland, and the gland has an interesting evolutionary history. Which is that in animals like lizards and amphibians, it is actually an eye. It is still the third eye. It has a lens, a cornea, and a retina. In humans, it's sunk deeper into the brain. It's not sensitive to light anymore. But maybe it's still a sense organ. And maybe it's producing DMT as a kind of lens through which reality may be viewed. So if we look at some of the experiences of Rick Strassman's volunteers, they are really astonishingly similar to the experiences of UFO abductees. And also we get elves and fairies into the mix as well. So we get probes, fiber optic things being put into my pupils. This is one of the DMT volunteers. Another one feels an object inserted into his arm. Another one sees a space station, entities inside the space station, and so on. And I've just illustrated some of the examples from UFO literature that relate to that. Some of them see insect-like entities. Again, the insect entity is a very common theme with UFO abductees. An alien laboratory, insect creatures. This was an insect vision that I myself had under the influence of ayahuasca. It's actually the only time when I really thought I was going to be abducted. I've never had an abduction experience, but sitting in the middle of the jungle in Peru under the influence of ayahuasca, I suddenly found a couple of flying saucers up above my head and a light coming down, and they wanted to abduct me. And I saw this thing and I said, no! And I totally refused it. And I opened my eyes and I wouldn't go, and I really, 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 really regret that. I should have had the courage to embrace that experience and throw myself into it. My friend Luis Luna, who runs an ayahuasca retreat in Brazil, has this advice when you confront a terrifying moment. When you confront a 800-foot long serpent with 100-foot wide jaws rearing up in front of you, what Luis says is just throw yourself right in. It'll be much better in the end than trying to resist it. Interestingly, a number of the volunteers reported almost the same words that were said to them by the entities they met. And what those entities said was, "We're so pleased you've discovered this technology," meaning DMT. "Now we can communicate with you more often." Rick was so disturbed by the results of his research and by the transpersonal experiences that his volunteers were reporting that in the end he had to stop the research. And he admits to being completely nonplussed by the consistencies and by the fact that more than half of the volunteers had experiences that were just identical to those of UFO abductees. Only we know they weren't being abducted because they were right there on hospital beds in the University of New Mexico. So what Rick's proposing is that UFO abductees may be spontaneous overproducers of endogenous DMT. That's why they have these experiences. But he's at pains to emphasize, and I need to really underline this very strongly, that saying that the UFO abduction experience is facilitated by DMT does not mean that it is an artifact of DMT. It does not mean that the experience is unreal. It may be that the DMT is applying a lens to the mind that allows us to see hitherto unseen things. Exactly as I argued with this issue of the telescope and the physical changes inside the brain, those may be taking place to allow us to see more of reality. So Rick speaks of us being tuned in, rather like a TV set, to one particular channel. We're all tuned into channel normal most of the time, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We got to function in this physical realm. We've got to pay our bills. We've not got to make sure we don't walk under a bus. So it's a good idea to be tuned into channel normal when you live in world normal. But the suggestion is that many other channels are broadcasting at us all the time. They're all equally real to channel normal, but we are so focused into channel normal that we just can't see them. They're just not accessible to our senses. And the suggestion is that what DMT does is it retunes the receiver wavelength of the brain and allows us temporarily to gain access to those other dimensions of reality. So what Rick concludes is that these worlds are usually invisible to us and our instruments and are not accessible using our normal state of consciousness. However, just as likely as the theory that these worlds exist, quote, only in our minds, is that they are in reality outside us and freestanding. If we simply change our brain's receiving abilities, we can comprehend and interact with them. So maybe we don't need the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland to crack open parallel universes. Maybe we've already got the instrument to do that inside our skulls, and it's called our brains. Maybe that in altered states of consciousness we can project our consciousness into other dimensions and encounter the entities that live there. And there have been a number of moments in the human story when it looks like that has happened. And one of them was around 40,000 years ago when the great cave art began, which we know was a result of the use of visionary substances. At that moment, there was a gigantic leap forward in the evolution of human behavior. Spirituality appeared. We started burying our dead and burying them with grave goods, which meant we were sure that some entity of that individual survived death. Hunting strategies got better. A whole economic life of humanity got better. A radical phase shift took place at the same time that the cave art was being created, and we know that the cave art was connected to altered states of consciousness. And then, of course, you have the phenomenon of the computer revolution in the 60s and the 70s. That's another moment when we seem to have tapped into another realm, and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak both made clear that without LSD, the Apple computer would never have got invented. And that Steve Jobs felt that taking LSD was one of 2 or 3 most important things he'd ever done in his life. And he preferentially hired programmers who had taken LSD. So that enormous burst of creativity in the 60s and the 70s, which we're still benefiting from today, was intimately linked to altered states of consciousness, not to the rational problem-solving mentality, but to altered states of consciousness. And so the suggestion is that these experiences, which are so reviled and ridiculed by our society as mere brain candy, can actually be transformatory and maybe of fundamental importance in the story of human evolution. And what's at stake today, if we ever needed such a phase shift, it's now. You know, we're fantastically good at technology, at material things, at making things. Probably no culture in human history has ever been as good at tech as we are. But we're absolute midgets when it comes to the spirit. We're totally underdeveloped in the realm of spirit in our society. We know nothing about the realm of spirit. We're pygmies. Area. We need to learn about the realm of spirit from those who do know, those who still keep what Terence McKenna called the flame of a tremendous mystery burning. And those are the shamans of tribal and hunter-gatherer societies. And there is a place in the future for shamanism in the West. It's already building. We need a Western form of shamanism. So what's at stake is not a small thing. We stand at a time in human history when there's a huge battle underway for the future direction of human consciousness. Our society loves one kind of consciousness, and that's the alert, problem-solving mentality. That is the kind of consciousness that our society values and hero worships and adores. Any other kind of consciousness is regarded with deep suspicion. The alert problem-solving state of consciousness, incredibly useful for Wall Street, incredibly useful for wars, incredibly useful for the more mundane aspects of science, incredibly useful for politics, totally taking up our lives, turning us into cogs in the machine, going to work every day, rationally problem-solving, sticking in that state of mind. The only let up we're allowed from it is with very boring drugs like alcohol and really bad TV, which is beamed at our consciousness 24 hours a day and at the consciousness of our children. Reality TV is not illegal, you know, but consider what that's doing to people's consciousness. So this is the state of our society, way over-focused on the alert problem-solving mentality and allowing only brief holidays from it in the form of mindless entertainment and drunkenness. is that really what we want for the future? Isn't it likely that this hubbub of waking life that we've created, this constant 24/7 focus on producing and consuming and rationally problem solving, maybe it's just cut out huge areas of reality for us that are incredibly important to nurture ourselves spiritually. If there be higher powers able to oppress us, maybe they can only get access to us through the subliminal door. Our society's just shut all of that down, or as shamans have told me in the Amazon, the real diagnosis of the sickness of our society is that we have severed our connection with spirit. If we do not reconnect with spirit, we will bring the whole world down in flames. Not just our world, but the world of all of the human race. And that's why I think we need to be thinking again about these visionary plants that the shamans work with. And I'm going to talk a little bit about ayahuasca before I finish tonight, which has become a very important part of my life. And I can only speak for my experiences. Ayahuasca is widely used in the Amazon. It is, in fact, used by more than 70 different indigenous cultures in the Amazon. And we have evidence, archaeological evidence, of the use of ayahuasca going back more than 4,000 years in the Amazon. As I say, more than 70 different cultures make use of it. And in the last 100 years, it has found its way out of the Amazon jungle and into the cities. So here we have the Santo Daime Church in Brazil and the União de Vegetal. Both of these are syncretic churches, mixing aspects of Christianity with aspects of Brazilian shamanism and with the consumption of ayahuasca. Both the União de Vegetal and the Santo Daime use ayahuasca as their sacrament. And a new phenomenon, which is ayahuasca tourism. Westerners traveling to Brazil, to Peru, and seeking out shamans there and drinking ayahuasca with them. I'm totally in favor of ayahuasca tourism. I think it's a really good thing. I utterly reject the notion that it's leading to the destruction of ayahuasca. Quite the opposite. It's leading to the planting and regrowth of ayahuasca on a phenomenal scale. And it is exposing Westerners to the wisdom of shamanism and to the possibility of a life-transforming visionary experience in the hands of people who know exactly what they're doing. So I'm very much in favor of ayahuasca tourism. And there I am with Francisco Montes Shuna, who's a shaman in Iquitos. This is a bush that grows in the Amazon. Its botanical name is Psychotria viridis. It's called chacruna in the Amazon. And the leaves there, they contain quite high concentrations of pharmacologically pure dimethyltryptamine, DMT. Now, ayahuasca is a beverage, but if you were to make a beverage just of these leaves and boil them in water, and you could drink as much as you liked, it wouldn't have any effect on you whatsoever. And the reason for that is that there's an enzyme in our stomachs called monoamine oxidase, which switches off DMT on contact. That's why DMT normally can't be absorbed orally. So then we come to the next aspect of the ayahuasca brew. Those leaves are one aspect. The other aspect is the vine, the ayahuasca vine itself. And the ayahuasca vine, while not being hallucinogenic itself, contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor which switches off the monoamine oxidase in the stomach and allows the DMT in the leaves to be absorbed orally. So it's a combination of the vine and the leaves with water that produces ayahuasca. And this is an astonishing achievement of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. There are more than 155,000 different species of plants and trees in the Amazon. They managed to find these two, which put together, brewed with water, produce extraordinary experiences at the level of consciousness. And so this is how it's done. Length of the vine are broken up by the shaman, placed in a cooking pot. Around 300 of those leaves are placed on top. More lengths of the vine are placed on top of that. Then you get boiling. You're going to boil for hours and hours and hours until the water reduces down to quite a sticky consistency at the bottom. That's poured off, typically into plastic bottles these days. More water's added, it's boiled again. And eventually you're going to end up with a liter or two of this dark, rather sinister-looking substance here, which is the ayahuasca brew. Now, I'm sure some of us in this room have drunk ayahuasca. How many have drunk ayahuasca? Quite a few. So you'll know what I mean when I say that it's not the best taste in the world. Ayahuasca it's hard work. It varies from person to person, but a lot of people find ayahuasca, the taste, absolutely revolting. I would compare it to a kind of essence of old socks, raw sewage, battery acid, sulfur, and a hint of chocolate. That would be the... I actually hold my nose when I drink it and pour it down my throat because the smell just even thinking about it is actually making me feel slightly shaky. So next thing that happens is the stomach starts feeling not quite right. You know, your stomach starts rumbling a bit, you might sweating a bit, you might feel a bit dizzy, might feel a bit nauseous. It tends to get worse. This was the first thing for me as a Westerner that I found this hard to adapt to, that I have these bodily functions which ayahuasca is going to reveal, and I'm just going to have to go jump behind a tree and deal with them. Because that's how it is. It will give you diarrhea, it will give you vomiting, not everybody, not every session, but most of us, most of the time. And that was the first lesson that ayahuasca taught me, that our bodies are actually the least important part of ourselves. That's just the vehicle that gets our consciousness around. And all this stuff, we just don't really need to worry about it that much. Set that aside and deal with what's happening at the level of consciousness. And what's happening at the level of consciousness with ayahuasca is an entry into an enchanted realm. Now let me be clear about this. Not all is sweetness and light on the other side. Not everybody who has an ayahuasca journey is going to have a wonderful sweetness and light experience. We do encounter the dark side out there. You have to brace yourself for these experiences. There are some terrifying moments which are part of this, but terrifying moments are part of any great journey into the unknown. Any great journey into the unknown, and that's what ayahuasca is. Something else ayahuasca does almost to everybody is it makes you review your own life. This can be quite painful. You're shown episodes from your life and your interactions with others, and you're shown your own dark side. You're shown how you've been hurtful and harmful towards others. And I myself, and I've seen this happen to many others in ayahuasca sessions, you end up in tears because you realize the pain that you've caused during your life. It's a very humbling and difficult experience to be shown with absolute clarity and truth, no hiding place, exactly how you really are. That's what ayahuasca will do for you. Now, this painful confrontation with the truth about yourself, of course, it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to change negative and non-nurturing aspects of your own behavior. It's an opportunity to become a kind of toxic human being. And it's a great mystery, if you think about it, that two plants from the Amazon jungle should lead to such deep psychological contemplation in individuals from all around the world, where they really start to question the course of their own lives and wish to make themselves better people. It's often regarded, taking a drug is often regarded as a shortcut, but what people who say that don't realize is that the work only begins after the experience. That's when you have to start integrating that experience into your life and doing something useful with it, and that can be a lifetime of work, and changing a lifetime of bad habits, which is what ayahuasca invites you to do, is indeed extremely hard work. Here, Martina Hoffman, a great visionary artist from Boulder, Colorado, is showing us really the only possible posture in relation to Mother Ayahuasca, which is a posture of total surrender. We must, during the session, allow ayahuasca to take us where she wishes, and it's rightly said that she does not always give you what you want, but she almost always gives you what you need. And it really is an extraordinary encounter with an intelligent entity. This, of course, to mainstream science sounds like total nonsense, but in the Amazon it's understood that an intelligent spiritual being lies behind the ayahuasca brew. and that her purpose, and she's usually seen as a woman, that her purpose is to communicate with humanity through the brew. They say that she comes from the vine and that she chose the leaf as the vehicle for communicating with humanity, that this is like the mother goddess of our planet. Her business is the planet, and yet she seems to have time for every individual. And there are these intimate encounters with Mother Ayahuasca, which do take place in the ayahuasca experience, which are virtually impossible to describe. Something else about ayahuasca is a very insistent message. It's just one of those universals that everybody who drinks the brew sooner or later reports. It's about the sacred and magical and enchanted nature of all of reality. This is what ayahuasca will show the jaded Western mind more clearly than anything else, that we still do live in an enchanted universe. We are surrounded and interpenetrated by magic, and that one of the strongest messages of ayahuasca, and the sense that our planet is a sacred realm comes across again and again in these visionary experiences. The Amazon jungle itself features very often in people's visions with ayahuasca, whether they're having those visions in the Amazon or somewhere far away in the world. It's almost as though, facing this horrific destruction as the Amazon does face today, and aware that that destruction cannot easily be stopped, that the Amazon has found a way to reach out to Western consciousness and to speak to us directly and to say, for God's sake, stop this before it's too late. Wake up and do something about it. I had a vision in which I encountered Mother Ayahuasca, and she said this to me: this is your problem. You have to solve this problem. We can't solve this problem for you. Humans have to solve it. So the Amazon comes again and again into these visionary experiences, and the horror and the sadness of what is happening in the Amazon today. Every one of these red dots which follow the roads is a fire which is being burnt to cut down the Amazon so that it can be planted to cattle ranches and soya bean farms. What incredible folly, what incredible stupidity. Only a species that has actually gone insane could allow such a thing to occur, and how desperately we need to be woken up. You know, we can mobilize funds and resources for all manner of wars, but we seem totally incapable of mobilizing those resources to meet the needs of the people of the Amazon basin so that they don't any longer have to go on destroying that incredible resource for all of humanity. It's not too late. I do think that we stand at the edge of an abyss, but I do think that the message is coming through more and more, that people are waking up, that we cannot go on with the system, with the destructive, hateful system that has been running the world for the last 100 years. We can't go on with the fear and the hatred and the suspicion and the lies of politicians. Something has got to change. You know, this is a society that will actually send us to prison for exploring our own consciousness. Can you imagine anything more profoundly unjust than that, where the state says that it has to tell you what you may or may not experience in the privacy of your own brain? How have we been fooled into allowing this to happen? How have we been fooled into handing that authority over to the state, where we've said, yes, here are the keys to my consciousness. You may tell me what I can experience and think with my own brain. What an insane situation we have. If I'm not sovereign over my own consciousness, then I'm not sovereign over anything. There's no point in talking about any kind of freedom. It's absurd for the West to go around imposing democracy on other countries when we haven't even sorted this basic issue out. Freedom of consciousness, in my mind, is the last great human rights struggle. And it's a struggle that is desperately important that we engage in, because those who would deny us freedom of consciousness are plunging the world into ruin. We need to regain contact with the enchanted universe. Thank you. Thank you. We need to regain contact with the magic. We need to dissolve all of the boundaries and claim our true birthright as sentient and loving members of the universe. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I'd be happy to do questions for 5 minutes if anybody has them. Yes. So the two questions were: would I identify as a shaman? No. I don't see myself as a shaman. I see myself as an absolute novice in that area. I'm trying to learn about these mysteries. I need the help of shamans. That's my view. As to the Mayan calendar, I am of the opinion that we are coming to the end of something bad, about to start something really good. I feel yeah. That's what I believe about 2012. It's an incredible opportunity, a cosmic opportunity to move the human race forward one huge step, which we really desperately need to take. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Are you aware of the recent case of the guy that was taken, who's put in court for doing the film 7/7 Ripple Effect and proved that the Queen is not lawfully the monarch, which now, by a jury, which now puts the entire legal system of America, Canada, Britain and all the Commonwealth countries, well, without lawful authority right now.
Yeah, well, very, very, very interesting. Of course, they're without authority anyway, but they continue to impose it nevertheless. Yes.
Having seen the amazing dots you start to put together from fingerprints of the god right through to entangled, I wonder what your thoughts are on. Hello, Graham. Thank you for what you've given us, both this evening and in your books.
Thank you.
And I just would like your opinion on, I guess, that period that's called the missing link.
Yeah.
You've put together so many amazing dots that you've sought to join. And now when you, I guess, bring in ayahuasca and the visionary journeys that we can take and learning we can take from them, what's your thoughts on perhaps what happened way back when there was a higher civilized, technological civilization on our Earth? What perhaps was the, are they at a similar cusp that we face now? What are your thoughts on that sort of previous period?
Well, it's interesting. Whenever you look at the mythology of a former golden age and of a lost civilization that was destroyed, usually in a flood, there isn't a single story like that amongst thousands around the world that don't implicate humanity in their own downfall. That there was some arrogance or cruelty or misdirection entered in, and that that we brought down on ourselves our own destruction. And what's, I think, encouraging about that, it means that we aren't doomed. It means that our destiny is actually in our own hands. We can do something about it, and every one of us can actually, if we can't influence the big picture, we can certainly influence the small picture, and influencing the small picture is a really great place to start. Yeah. Yes.
What do you think the future of the ego is? What is the future of the ego? Of our ego?
Oh, that's too deep for me. The future of the ego. God, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Could it be the super ego? I don't know. I have no idea what the future of the ego is, or what the past of the ego is, or indeed what the ego is. It's a psychiatric or psychological construct. I mean, is there such a thing as an ego? I don't know. I feel there's a me somewhere in here. I think everybody does. But these concepts of Freudian concepts, they don't mean a lot to me. I don't know. I don't know what the ego is. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, Graham, probably you are, that the UK branch of the Santo Daime Church was recently busted, and two of their leading members are currently going through the UK criminal justice system for basically practicing their religion. They're launching a defence under Article 9 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which guarantees each and every one of us the right to spiritual and religious freedom. And just the one thing I'd like to say, both to the audience and also, I don't know what you do, Graham, on this front, but there is more that can be done to lobby and influence the powers that be to change the laws that basically prohibit our use of these consciousness enhancing substances. The Global Commission on Drugs, for example, recently reported about how the prohibition laws are woefully obsolete. They don't even achieve the goals of reducing consumption that the powers that be seek to achieve. Consumption is on the rise, and the kind of consumption that a lot of young people are engaging in, particularly when you look at ketamine, particularly unhealthy. And I would call upon you, Graham, to use obviously the very powerful powers of communication and persuasion that you have to motivate people like us to do more to lobby politicians who are increasingly aware that the current systems are becoming eroded and that new ways are required. And if we all combine to talk a little bit more, then the chances of change will get better.
Thank you for that. And you're absolutely right. It's really time. I mean, it's time that action was taken. One of the things about people who like to explore altered states of consciousness is that we don't really like getting in other people's faces and being, it's better to be chilled and relaxed and to explore life. But sometimes issues are so serious that mobilization is required. And this issue of freedom of consciousness is one of them. The Global Commission that you mentioned is doing a fantastic job. I'm working with the Beckley Foundation. There's an initiative going before the House of Lords in November. The effort is to use every means possible to restore common sense to this debate and to realize that what we're dealing with here with the persecution of drug users is a grotesque human rights abuse. That's what's taking place. Tens of thousands of lives in Britain are being ruined every year because of these fucking laws, which have got no place in our society, no place in our heritage. Yeah. And it's up to every one of us to do something about that, and certainly to get involved to the extent that is possible. There'll be more petitions coming across as well to show the strength of feeling on this issue. So I think with that, I'm going to call it a night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.